Welcome to Until All of Us Are Free, a year-long multimedia education project dedicated to Black liberation as collective liberation. I am your host and the creator of this project, Ijoma Oluo. As news of the genocide in Palestine has been at the forefront of discussion in many progressive and leftist spaces for this last year and a half, there have been people begging us to not forget Africa, to not forget the extreme violence and devastation happening in places like Sudan and Congo. The devastation happening in Africa is related to the genocide in Palestine, and it's related to us here in the United States. Not only is this devastation a part of the global imperialism that has been oppressing and exploiting the global South for hundreds of years, but it is an important part of the violent anti-Blackness that shapes so much of our lives here in the US. For today's discussion on Black liberation and the exploitation of Africa, I'll be in conversation with three artists and activists whose work lies at the intersection of Black America and Africa. Francesca Iluhu, also known as Femme de Lis, is a Congolese and French-American musical artist based in Seattle.
Collective liberation to me means uplifting several movements all at once. It's about the intersectionality of causes, of movements, and being able to uplift as many voices as possible that are facing discrimination.
Aja Barber is a Black American writer and author of the book Consumed. She currently lives in the UK.
Collective liberation for me means looking at global issues from different viewpoints to try and make the most cohesive plan to get us out of this mess.
Alsara is a Sudanese musician, songwriter, producer, and movement worker based in Brooklyn, New York.
Collective liberation to me means a world where being alive is not a privilege. I don't think it's a complicated concept. I see no reason why we live in a world where everyone acts like being alive is something you need to earn the right to have. And that's what the majority of oppression is based around. So to me, collective liberation is a very simple thing. It's like you want to live in a world where we don't act like water and healthcare and being alive is something that you need to earn from the womb.
Sudan and the region surrounding it is not new to conflict or humanitarian crisis, and much of the violence Sudan has seen these past decades has been directly related to the impacts of the colonization of Africa by European powers. But since April of 2023, there has been devastating violence in Sudan as clashes between the Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary rapid support forces has killed more than 60,000 people and displaced over 12.5 million. The violence has been widespread and brutal. Communities have been razed, sexual violence has been widespread, and massive amounts of infrastructure has been destroyed. This violence has brought an already fragile country to the brink of collapse, with an estimated 30 million people in need of humanitarian aid. A lot of conflict in Africa is written off as what Africa does, and many have said the same about the current crisis in Sudan. But at the core of much conflict in Africa lies the fight over the continent's abundant natural resources, and Sudan is no exception to this. Sudan is rich in valuable resources like gold, copper, and uranium, as well as fertile soil for agriculture. The global north relies upon these resources and is regularly trying to secure them as cheaply as possible. The UAE has been accused by many of supporting the violence in Sudan by arming the RSF in order to secure continued access to Sudan's resources.
I think a lot of people forget that these places they think of as far away and as like on the fringes are actually the center of the old world. Like Fort Sudan is one of the oldest forts in the world. So is Mogadishu. The fight over controlling them has been going on since the Ottoman Empire. Like this is not a new fight. And so we're playing a power game right now where the global north is trying to reset its allies in the global south. And so hence you're seeing this global rise of like right-wing movement towards an old colonial looking setup, where we're going to deal with your oppressor so that we're not even necessarily the ones dealing with you directly. So we just get the stuff. So the United States has allies in who? The UAE, in Saudi Arabia, in Egypt. And in order to coerce them to do certain things, they are exchanging this stuff. Like the UAE is one of the biggest benefactors of the war in Sudan, as is Egypt, as is Saudi Arabia. The global price of gold has gone down since the war has exploded because majority of it comes from Sudan. 78% of gum arabica, which is the sap that holds your rubber together, that's preservative in all your tin goods, that 78% of that comes from Sudan. So you're looking at a lot of vital resources that the more you destabilize a region, the cheaper they get for you on the outside. Like, I think like 80% of UAE's food is being grown in Sudan.
A stable, just government of a peaceful nation cares for its people and its environment. It cares about how resources are extracted from the earth. It cares about how workers are treated. It puts money into infrastructure and its people to care for its people. Ethical governance is expensive and raises the cost of the materials being extracted. Conflict in these regions enables the global north to access raw materials more cheaply. By dealing with people who are willing to sell these materials with no concern for the people on the land, by dealing with people who want to sell these materials to buy weapons or power instead of building infrastructure. Why pay a fair market value for resources you need when you can ensure more exclusive, cheap access simply for the cost of some guns?
In the long run, when you're trying to replay the colonial game again of, let's say, who's going to control the Red Sea port, because people don't understand how important like Navy ports still are. Like the majority of major things are shipped by sea still. And the Suez Canal blocking, like destroying half of the global movement of merchandise, made that pretty clear to people, I hope. Anyways. And so now it's like you have this continuous argument of like, okay, well, we want this chunk of this port. We want this chunk of this port. If we have governments in there that are interested in protecting their people, it's a problem for us because they're not selling us things at a lower rate.
Just as in Sudan, the fight over resources are at the heart of the devastating violence in Congo. There has been conflict between the Congolese government forces and an armed group called M23, which is heavily financed and reinforced by the RDF, Rwanda's defense forces, for many years now. But since 2021, this conflict has seriously escalated with a rise in mass killings and the widespread use of sexual violence. The roots of this conflict go back to the Rwandan genocide in 1994, which was also directly related to the violent colonization of Africa and the corruption and conflict it left behind. But also, like in Sudan, this is a fight over resources, natural resources that the global north wants. Congo is rich in minerals like gold and coltan, which is a critical mineral in the making of many of the electronics we use every day, like cell phones, cameras, and electric cars. It is no coincidence that M23 has seized several mining areas in their campaign of violence across Congo. And it's also no coincidence that Rwanda, who has been backing M23 in this campaign of violence, has seen their mineral exports rise with the increase of violence.
It's interesting hearing people sometimes talk about Congo in isolation and not understand the ways that the US and other imperial powers are playing a hand in the devastation that's happening over there. Cobalt mining, lithium mining are super important to our technology. All of our rechargeable batteries require cobalt, and it's super toxic, and the mining conditions are terrible. And I feel like there's a lot of confusion around what is happening in Eastern Congo, who's responsible, where is the violence starting. So Congo shares a border with Rwanda, and a lot of people are seeing talk of M23 rebel forces or like Rwandan-backed things, and it's because they share a border, and a lot of the minerals that Rwanda is exporting is actually coming from Congo. So it's all about the minerals that are located there and who has access to them. And if you track companies that are sourcing the minerals like Glencore, There's so many human right violation lawsuits against Glencore. All the information is in the internet. Like, you can find everything. But really what people need to know is that it's just like a land grab. There's a lot of chaos happening because people are trying to acquire as much land because it's rich in nutrients, because that is how we can afford to make all these phones, all these Teslas, all these Apple products, through those minerals.
But it is not just colonialism that is to blame. It is our rising consumerism that is the financial drive behind these conflicts. These minerals are so in demand because we want these gadgets, we want new ones every year, and we don't want to pay a fair price for them.
When I talk to people of my generation, they don't realize how long lasting of an issue this is. Mineral extraction, or even just like colonial exploitation, that goes back a really, really long time. So it's not really a new issue. But I think a lot of people are feeling the urgency of it now. The rate at which that we're producing technology, we just can't keep up with the demand for resources. So it's just heightening and worsening problems. There's no limit to how many iPhones are coming out. There's no limit to how many laptops are coming out. And we're not even fixing the parts that are broken. We'll just throw out the whole thing. So it's a waste of materials on top of that, which is super devastating.
People don't think of it because people don't think about where their stuff comes from in general. And to them, as far as they're concerned, they grew up in a world that has consistently normalized the violence against Black and African bodies. You know, in general, it's like you see things happening anywhere on the sub-Saharan African continent. Well, at least it's not more than 30,000 people who died, or at least it's not more. It's like the numbers have to be so astronomical for anyone to even want to report it. But then for you to even care about it, because the idea of Black pain is almost fetishized at this point. And it's just like and it's creating this culture where like we have to sell to the global north our pain in order for us to get a minuscule of the reparations of the resources being extracted from there.
War is not the only violence our consumerism is wreaking upon Africa. Our tech and textile waste is devastating the environment in many African countries. Fast fashion is trashing Africa. Our desire for fast, cheap, trendy clothing leads to an extraordinary amount of waste. And as these clothes that fall out of fashion or rip or tear a month after we buy them are tossed in the trash or in the donate bin, they make their way to places like Ghana. Millions of discarded garments are shipped to Ghana each week. The few reusable garments in these shipments are sold in Ghana's markets. The rest are burned or tossed into massive landfills that clog the waterways and leach massive amounts of microplastics into the soil and water.
When it comes time to dump the billions of garments that we're all buying and not really wearing on someone, where does it end up? Well, it ends up in Kenya or Ghana or Uganda. In my book, I focus on Ghana, but there are what we call post-colonial dumping sites all over Africa, and it's all based on these systems of consumerist cycles. And that's our homeland that is being absolutely destroyed. Okay, the people that are at the top of these consumerist systems, they're not getting this fast fashion waste dumped in their backyard. They would scream in the streets if it happened, but it's getting dumped in the backyard of Black people. And we should care no matter what, but what we should really understand is that everywhere you look in these systems, people are looking to exploit us, and we're so busy playing the game and trying to do the right thing that we're not recognizing that we're all being played here.
We can't talk about the current situation in African countries without talking about the lasting impact of European colonization on Africa. While Europeans had traded in Africa for centuries, and Europeans had long been stealing African peoples for slavery, it wasn't until the mid-1800s that we saw European powers rush to claim vast chunks of Africa for their own. As European countries raced to grab portions of this resource-rich land, this devastating invasion came to be known as the Scramble for Africa. the colonization of Africa was incredibly violent on many levels. Not only was the takeover of land and resources often accomplished and maintained by force, but it was also accompanied by the arbitrary redrawing of borders, the forced reallocation of labor and agriculture to the pure extraction of raw materials, and the forced destruction of pre-existing customs, religion, language, history, and forms of government. The countries formed by European colonization were designed purely for the extraction of natural resources out of the continent to Europe. This means that roads and railroads only led to the ports, that infrastructure and taxation only supported empire, that all self-reliant industry was abandoned, that local government was only allowed to be loyal to empire and never the people. It also meant that any solidarity amongst different tribes and ethnic groups in these countries was severely discouraged, with these groups often pitted against each other in order to maintain colonial power. Many of these countries would not gain their independence until the 1950s and 1960s, some not even until the 1970s. And when European powers left these countries, they were not interested in helping to fix the mess they made. They were, however, still interested in the raw materials they had long been extracting. It is no surprise then that countries arbitrarily cobbled together by outsiders, countries that had their customs and rules of governance destroyed and deliberately replaced by ones rife with corruption and cronyism and whose sole purpose was to extract resources for export with none of that profit serving the people. And then you add the extreme debt that European countries placed upon these fledgling nations in the name of aid. It's no surprise that these countries would struggle. Africa, African people, and their descendants have always only been recognized by Western powers as objects for exploitation. And today in the US, Black people, many descendants of those stolen from Africa, are expected to participate in a violent capitalism that harms us and the land of our ancestors. We are told that there is an American dream we can obtain that will make us exempt from the worst of American racism. We are pressured to buy, to consume things that will make us more acceptable to whiteness. We are sold a respectability that will never materialize, but the items we buy, paid for with the work we are usually undercompensated for, often take a measurable toll on African countries and African people. Our participation in hyper-consumerist culture keeps us in debt, keeps us chained to the capitalist machine, and helps lock Africa in cycles of exploitation and devastation. At no point in our history has capitalism not been violently anti-Black.
When it comes to particularly the system of fast fashion, I need Black people to know that this is us. It has our exploitation stamped all over it. And we don't see it because we are brought into these capitalistic systems. We live in the United States and we are being indoctrinated into these systems because we have always been in a place of lack here, right? We have always been trying to not be exploited and treated terribly. So we really lean in, particularly what we buy, what we wear, how we do our hair, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I really feel like so much of that is just the legacy of slavery built in and never being good enough. And I think living in a world where the deck of cards is stacked against you will put you in a place where it's I need to buy the right thing. I need to own the right thing. But when it comes to the exploitation, we think that we're somehow divorced of it. When it comes to, first of all, where does the resources come from that go into making a fashion system? Well, a lot of it comes from countries where non-white people live. They might not be Black people, but we should still care about them. And when you look at the Industrial Revolution, there's one element of the Industrial Revolution there. If you take it away, it all falls apart. And that has to do with us. That's called chattel slavery. Without chattel slavery, you would not have today's fashion industry. because you wouldn't have had the Industrial Revolution. You wouldn't be able to process that much cotton that quickly through unpaid labor, when that was what really sped things up and built the systems that we have today.
A lot of people don't understand, because when we talk about the US history, we talk about the backward South that still insisted on using people labor and the North that used machinery and factories. They forget that the North built those factories by processing the goods that human labor was taking. Like the North US that didn't have slavery would not have existed as an industrialized region without slavery, because
Absolutely.
they built it to process this product. And so it's in many ways a really hypocritical way of thinking of US history, of the North versus the South, and slavery versus enslaved,
Mhm.
especially when we consider the fact that the North built its development off of slavery. And so looking at that and recognizing that the entire history of global capitalism rests on pulling resources from Africa.
Yep.
First people, and now still raw materials
Mhm.
all of the time. We have to see the connection, and we have to understand that as Black Americans, we will never be more to this country than a resource.
100%.
And just as Africa is seen, and that we have to have that solidarity, not only because it's ethical, because it's right, but because as long as that apparatus, it's still the exact same apparatus. As long as it exists, we are all at risk from it.
100%. Like white supremacy and capitalism are obviously extensions of each other.
Mhm.
And the magical, the Lulu moment of capitalism is the way it has you convinced that if you have enough money, you can outgrow white supremacy and repression,
Right.
or you can be avoided somehow. It's just like they will come for you eventually. It doesn't
Right.
matter how rich you think you are.
And also interesting too, on the flip of that, is it also actively works to convince white people that white supremacy will pay off for them as far as capitalism, that poor white people will be able to rise above.
Hmm.
And it's just not how capitalism works. You
Absolutely.
cannot have the vast majority of people doing well under capitalism.
100%.
Where's your profit when that happens? And it's so frustrating. And yeah, like you were talking about Black imperialism, I think that's a huge thing that I want to focus on, because I'm reading Omar Ellicott's book, One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This.
Mm,
And it's beautiful, highly recommend. And one thing that he grapples with as an Egyptian Canadian and now American is, what does it mean to be the victim of imperialist systems, global colonialism, living in a country actively colonizing and harming countries around the world? And what does that mean to your complicity? What does that mean to your idea of self, to your ideas of justice? And I think when we talk about Black imperialism, we have to investigate, because I was so frustrated around, even like as we're looking at the election as a recent example, but it's still an absolute issue, of so many people saying we have to ignore what's happening overseas because all that matters is what's happening here, as if there isn't a thread always binding
here and
policy.
there.
Yeah, and as if
Yeah.
that machine will never turn its searchlight back on our populations, as if it's not strengthening itself and strengthening its exploitation and violent apparatus. We aren't exempt, and there's no way we can say, let's support a government that kills Black and brown people overseas because it's safer for Black and brown people here.
When it's not.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't understand people who think that, when I'm like, everything about the history of this country has been based on fascism. It
Mhm.
never stopped. It also never, ever, ever stopped.
Yep.
Like it went from one terrible kind of fascism to another terrible kind of fascism with an umbrella of fascist behavior holding it all
Mhm.
together.
Mhm.
So the idea that, oh, at least them versus us, I was like, it never stopped being you either, though.
Yep.
It just never stopped. They don't have enough to feed on right now here, and they're going literally to get more food. And that food looks like other people's death and oppression. And
Yeah.
so to see or to think that there is in any way a pause in the system or has ever been. It's like the ultimate historical denial. And honestly, really offensive on behalf of all Indigenous and Black people in this country. Like, I'm just like, when did we stop getting oppressed here in the first place? So I feel like it used to be that people used religion as an opiate for the masses, and now it's consumption as the new religion that is an opium for the masses. And it makes people think that if they get cheap enough things, which is actually why I'm glad the tariffs are going to be put in. Now, I need people's fiscal education to get a little bit better so they understand how hard it's going to be to escape America. Like, the access they have to stuff right now is because America has its boot on other people's necks. And if you put those tariffs because there seems to be a lack of connection of how the world's economy is now linked, because of the way free market has rapidly destroyed the world, it's going to really hit at home here first in the poorer communities, which I'm not sure how they're going to react to. I hope it's something that we can set up so that we're reacting in a way that brings us together. Because I'm just like, y'all, the majority of America doesn't have running clean water.
The thing about capitalism that's so interesting to me, because the US has never been a democracy. It is a pro-capitalist country, but it sold the idea of capitalism being democracy. Capitalism is so violently anti-democratic.
Yes. Preach.
And it's
exactly, yes.
It's so wild to me.
Preach.
You can choose communism. You can choose socialism. You can't choose capitalism. Capitalism chooses you, or it uses you, or it discards you.
Yes.
And you don't get a say. You get a say if you have a particular amount of dollars. You get a say if you control the labor of others. But the vast majority of people, it only works if they never have a say in how it works. The US is an oligarchy, and has been long before Elon Musk made it obvious to us all. The billionaires who have been pulling the strings at Washington in order to protect their capitalist empires have finally stopped pretending that they aren't in charge. The biggest threat to our liberty, to every group in the crosshairs of this administration, has always been racial capitalism. It has always been tied to the global exploitation of Black, brown, and Indigenous peoples and their lands. Every bit of this machine that remains is a threat to us all.
I think culturally, there's a lot of divide and conquer happening within Congo, within other African countries, but just within the diaspora in general. I feel like sometimes you'll hear Black Americans say like, oh, Africans think we're all like thugs and we're all dirty. But vice versa, there's a rhetoric about Congolese people being savages and barbaric and all this stuff. And that comes from colonialism. It's all rooted in the same place, meant to divide us. Every time that we see a challenge to white supremacy through Pan-African movements, there's assassination of leaders that happens. And that's not a coincidence. It's very threatening to uphold white supremacy if everyone is contradicting that rhetoric. So if we can at least acknowledge that as a people, I think we can overcome some of those obstacles that are meant to divide us.
For people who are looking at this and saying, okay, what can I be doing to either deepen my understanding of this or try to be a part of some resistance or solution to this? Like, what advice would you give to people?
Well, my first advice is that don't take a bigger bite than you can chew on, you know? Like, a lot of people think they're like, oh my God, I need to fight all of repression everywhere, all at once. I'm like, don't. Find a little nook and focus. And surround yourself by people who are focused on other nooks so that you guys are really collectively feeding into each other's vision of what the world is doing. Do not try to do this alone. This is not a sprint. This is a stamina game, you know? Just take it slowly, one day at a time, do the things you can do. And for me, that most important thing in how you fight oppression is through knowledge and through money. Gaining as much knowledge as possible and giving yourself the tools to properly dissect the information you're taking in so that you understand when you're being lied to, whether it's from a liberal or from a right wing, versus just consuming things. But for me, it's always been about gaining more knowledge, spreading more knowledge, and really being conscious of where I spend my money. who I spend it with, how I spend it, and who I take money from.
I hope people still have like the fight within them to keep going, especially when it comes to like at the expense of the nice things that they have. Like don't get a new iPhone. I think strategic boycotts is really important. I think Tesla especially, I mean, their rechargeable batteries are for a car, so it's very big. And so I think if you can boycott Tesla, boycott Apple, stop buying new things. Like you can keep the things you have, and I think those companies have done a really good job of making us reliant on those materials as well. But I think we just have to demand for more modular technology, which is like when we can replace the specific part that's broken and not have to throw out the whole thing.
If you want to learn more about how you can make changes to your relationship with capitalism that can help us all get more free right now, make sure you are subscribed at untilwearefree.com because we will be discussing this more throughout the month. Also, if you didn't catch our last episode on boycotts and strikes, be sure to go back and check that out at untilwearefree.com.
I released a song last May called Dead Mama. And it has such an aggressive title because I wanted people to really feel that the resources that they're using for their phones and their Teslas and their luxury items are costing people's lives. In Congo, thousands of people are being killed like monthly. But you'll hear these numbers that are in such a big scale that it's hard to put a face to it. And so the chorus is like, only price to pay is your dead mama. Sipping crimson in a Tesla, only price to pay is your dead mama. So that hopefully people can think about their own mothers, their own families when they're hearing these statistics of the devastation happening in Congo, that they can still tie it back to their own families. What if your, child was mining cobalt and became ill from that? Or what if your mother was the one mining these minerals, sourcing your phone? Would you still buy the phone? And I think that's a really important conversation to have.
The apprehension is almost killing me. Fingers brush the touch I crave. Sexual tension I'd rather left unsaid. Buried bodies in my bed. Is it all in my head? Is this a haven or a madhouse waiting to cave in? Lithium deposits, my backyard bones will just fade in. The earth is getting hotter. Speak up, don't be a martyr. Sipping crimson in a Tesla. Only price to pay is your dead mama. Dry heat in the Congo. Cobalt dust is the way to go. Only price to pay. How many deaths man to form a moratorium? Starvation's only getting nearer for those who have something to fear. Erase my memory, I too can be free. The shame you put me through, fulfill fellatio misdeeds. Oh no, I won't lead a silent life. Asphyxiate myself to ingratiate myself. Oh no, produce a false life for you. The apprehension is almost killing me. Fingers brush a chosen grave. Strong conviction that should be left unsaid. Buried bodies in my bed. All of my is a haven or World is fading, Earth is getting hotter. Speak up, don't be a martyr. Crimson in a Tesla, only price to pay is your dead mama. Is this a haven or a matter of right? Even the Congo, how long dust is the way to go? Fading, no more killing, go. Speak up, don't mama.
This has been another episode of Until All of Us Are Free, a year-long multimedia education project dedicated to Black liberation as collective liberation. I am your host and the creator of this project, Ijoma Oluo. Don't miss out on the episode notes for this episode, as well as an archive on all past episodes at untilwearefree.com. There is a lot of valuable information and resources there for you. That is also where you can support this project by becoming a paid subscriber. All of this content is free to access, and this content is all currently funded by me and whatever support you can give. Your support helps me make the best quality educational material I can. I want to thank Francesca Aluhu, Aja Barber, and Alsara for their amazing work in the world and their contributions to this episode. You can find links to their work and how you can support them in the episode notes. And Francesca recently released a beautiful new album, so be sure to check it out in the episode note links. This episode was produced by Isabel Kamili, and the music is by Gabriel Teodros. And thank you, Francesca, for letting us use your song as well. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you in the next episode.